Welcome to Missions Life, where we share resources and encouragement for current missionaries, future missionaries, and those praying for missionaries. Missions can be hard, and we want to help you face the challenges of life, leadership, and ministry. We want your life to bear fruit for the gospel wherever you are. I'm Kyle Ferran, here with my co-host and wife, Heather. Welcome to the Missions Life podcast. Today on the show, we have Matt Bennett and Josh Bowman with us. Matt Bennett and his family lived in North Africa and the Middle East for 7 years, and he's now an associate professor of missions and theology at Cedarville University in Cedarville, Ohio. He earned his PhD in missiology at SEBTS and also holds an MA in intercultural studies and an MDiv in intercultural church planting. Josh, after graduating from Southern Seminary in 2002, Dr. Bowman served as a rural church planter in Zambia with the International Mission Board. His passion is to see healthy churches led by theologically sound leaders reach those who have never heard the gospel. After 8 years in Zambia, the Lord led his family to South Asia to focus on church strengthening, leadership development, and unengaged people groups. He's now a professor at Cedarville University, where his desire is to raise up students with a passion for Jesus and the nations. I've known Matt for quite a few years now, and always appreciated Matt's heart for the Lord and his humility that he brings to everything he does. I haven't been able to get to know Josh as well, but from our conversations and hearing him speak, it's clear that he has a deep love for God and others. And both Matt and Josh are thoughtful and insightful, and today I'm excited to talk with them about their book, Before You Go, Wisdom from 10 Men on Serving Internationally. So Matt and Josh, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, Kyle. Appreciate it
to be here.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure to get to know you guys over the years, and so I was excited to see this book that you came out with, and I think it's going to be a great resource for a lot of people as they prepare to go and work with those that are preparing to go. So we had some questions here for you. One of the first ones was just, what challenged you guys to write Before You Go?
Well, I think we got to be careful not to take too much credit because there's a women's version, and really it's Matt's wife, my wife a little bit, who came up with an idea. And for both them and for us, there were just consistent conversations that we were having and questions that students would have, especially where we are here at Cedarville, but even outside of that in our local church. And just looking about it, hey, is there a good resource in this space? And we saw a need. And the other one is, in those conversations, there's some other topics that they actually weren't asking about that we thought that would be really important for them to think about. There's ones that came up consistently and ones that didn't. And we thought, hey, we have some great friends who we respect, and many of them are on the field, and we would love our students and those who we get to talk to on a regular basis and others to be able to hear from these voices. So that was part of the reason.
Yeah, I think my comment at the beginning of the book is to Emily that I'm always riding her coattails. So it's definitely living in her shadow as she kind of led the project on the women's side, and then we looked at each other. I believe Josh came in here, and I think he addressed me as an idiot, and then explained which particular expression of my idiocy he was referring to, and that we hadn't yet suggested doing a guy's version. And as he said, the authors of each of the chapters are guys that we wish that they would write their own whole books, but we settled for getting a chapter of their wisdom. And so we're grateful for the chance to get to bring this together.
Very good. Now, I'd say I really enjoyed reading through it. It was definitely one of those things like, man, this would have been really helpful 2 decades ago. But thank you for doing that. And we've actually now going to start having our new missionaries go through it as well. So it's going to be a good resource for us.
It's super encouraging.
Yeah. So the book's written for really to focus on those preparing to serve overseas. And what are some of the biggest misconceptions that people have about missions before they go?
I mean, one of the things that I find myself counseling students in fairly regularly is the misconception related to what the work is and how different it is from the life of disciple making here in the States or at home, wherever they're coming from. I think while certainly the things on the surface, like learning a new language and learning a new culture and trying to figure out how to overcome the barriers that any particular unique idolatry is going to put in between understanding the gospel and a culture, those are all things that are going to be distinct and make the task look different maybe on the surface, but at the core, it's knowing God and inviting others to know God. And so I'd say this to students as they're thinking about, assessing their own trajectory towards the field. But I also I want to raise that issue to pastors or ministry leaders who are thinking about their spheres of influence and what does it look like to disciple and to raise up leaders in their context. I don't want them to be of the opinion that they don't have anything to say to missionary preparation because for some reason it's a wildly different task. I think the preparation in theology and Bible and in Christian living are things that are universals. The application might be different, but training and assessing and evaluating and identifying missionaries in your context is a very similar process, and you're using very similar metrics. So.
Yeah. Good.
Another misconception might be something around just the individualistic nature of many in the West that would think, I got to figure out my calling. This is my calling, and this is kind of be my focus in the country that I feel most called to. And I think part of this book is to let us think about the local church and their part in that. So that's going to be one of the big themes. And I just don't think people really know. I mean, I think they think hard and there's a lot that's exciting. So I think part of this book is to keep the passion and zeal for missions, of course, but a little bit of soberness to see actually there's going to be some hard things in your first year and in subsequent years. There are real challenges to be there. And each of these chapters, too, it deals like with a specific scripture and then just some practical lessons that somebody who's walked down that road. And I think that's encouraging. It's one thing, to not know what the challenges are, then you're naive. It's another to know, okay, these are the challenges, and I don't know anybody who's ever come that, and I don't know if I can. But in this book, there's men who've walked the path, who've kept their eyes on Jesus, because you keep your eyes on yourself, and you're either going to be arrogant because you think you got it, or you're going to be really depressed because you recognize you don't have the resources, or you can put your eyes on the circumstances. And if you're someone about to go to the mission field, if you see the challenges for what they are, they can be overwhelming. Instead, I think we're looking at a group of men who are more overwhelmed at their Savior and what we have in the church and in the gospel to overcome that than they are overwhelmed by whatever little things that are out there. And I think they're kind of meant as a way as coffee talk chapters, that if you were sitting across from this missionary, what would he tell you? And they could look you in the eye and say, hey, here's some real challenges and here's some real resources and truths. And I've done this. Come along, brother.
Yeah, that's really good. There's also that idea of the transatlantic metamorphosis where missionaries will all of a sudden, as they get on the plane and are en route somewhere, that God's going to transform them and they're going to be an amazing missionary over there. But just that idea that people need to be doing it at home. Coming back to what you had said, Matt, about it's the similarities there. People actually need to be doing this where they are, and that's really an indication of how they're going to be working on the mission field. So that's a part of what kind of connecting point there to what you guys were saying there, that we've seen that happen a lot, where there's just this grandiose idea of what's going to happen to them, but just the necessity to be who they need to be right where they are, and then God will transplant them, take them somewhere else to be able to do that same thing. Any other thoughts on that? Misconceptions that people have?
I think it might fit into this category, but I think a lot of guys, especially their first year, we're used to getting our identity and how we kind of think about ourselves from our work, from our task, and kind of we get meaning and purpose from that. And language learning in the first year of learning a new culture and all those things. I've seen, at least personally experienced, that a lot of guys really struggle with that. Guys have master's degrees. I was one of them, and you get over there and it's a struggle just to communicate like a child. There's something that's deeply humbling about that and can shake it. So there's some certainly who maybe struggle with the thought of language learning. Others are like, hey, I'm going to get this, or it's not going to be that bad. And then you can get to a point 3 to 9 months in where you're over kind of the honeymoon phase, and there's some real challenges. Again, a realistic perspective from those who have walked the road. Just kind of can set you up for a little better understanding of what reality is going to be. I think in good marriage counseling that we would do, we'd want people to align their expectations of what it might actually look like to live with another person of the opposite sex in marriage as God designed for us, but there's challenges to that. So I think the book is seeking to align more of those expectations.
That's really good. I've mentioned this on a few other podcasts as well, but the statistic is that 50% of first-term missionaries leave the field after their first term. Mm-hmm. And I think about 70% of that 50% the majority of them were for preventable reasons. One of the big ones is unmet expectations. And so just clarifying those expectations of, hey, this is going to be hard. That's really so important to have that clarity of thought there, because it's going to take a while.
And to that point, yeah, it's going to take a while. I think maybe one other misconception is that if I'm willing to go and there is an identifiable need, like me waiting or being prepared or being developed is resisting God's will for my life, or I'm failing to be obedient, and instead thinking through, am I prepared to do the fullness of the task that the church would be sending me to do in a particular place? And if not, how can I be faithful in getting prepared and being developed? And it doesn't mean everybody needs a PhD, but it also means that sometimes you may be affirmed by your church as somebody who's heading overseas and somebody they want to send, but they may ask you to spend 3 years going to seminary, or they may ask you to spend a couple years doing an internship at the church to oversee your ministry and speak into it. And that should not be perceived as a delay of your obedience, but rather part of the pathway. And in many ways, this is just a short book, so it's 10 chapters worth of slowing somebody down in their quickness to buy tickets overseas. But hopefully it's even something that through reading these chapters, a church can say, hey, this is a soft spot maybe in your preparation, and this is not a no for you because we've identified something that's maybe in need of development, but it might mean a wait. And would you wait with us with intentionality to develop these things so that when we send you over, you can be there for the long haul and not fizzle out because of something we didn't do our best to shore up in equipping you before you went.
Yeah, that is so important. I recently heard a speaker that was talking about this, where someone came up to him and was like, I want to be able to do what you did. And he looks at the person, he's like, are you willing to do what I did to do what I do? And I think that is such an important question that people need to ask themselves, because it takes time and equipping and growth to be able to get to that point. It doesn't happen overnight. Just because we're willing doesn't mean we're ready. And that's the first step, but there's a lot that's involved there. So thank you for saying that. That's really good. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So kind of on that same note, Matt, you had written a chapter called Discerning Your Calling. How can aspiring missionaries discern their calling and determine whether they're truly ready to serve overseas?
Yeah, I think this is a really important question, and one that in some ways it fits under that realm of misconceptions, because I think very well-intentioned missionaries and missions pastors and missions assumptions that previous generations, I think, have inherited is this idea that there is a special, distinct calling that is individually discerned that is going to be part of your ballast when things get hard overseas. And so I've talked to a lot of earlier missionaries who would say, if I didn't have that day, after that missions conference that I could point back to where I so clearly discerned that the Lord was sending me overseas, man, I would have given up 3 or 4 different times throughout my ministry. And so for some, then that experience of having a distinct moment of euphoric clarity on what this individual calling is the thing that they expect all missionaries to be able to point back to. And some have even said, if you don't have that experience, I'm not going to take you because I'm afraid of the statistics that you just quoted, that you might be among those who would flake because you don't have this moment in time individually discerned that you can point to. And I just think, while there is some very practical wisdom in being able to have something that anchors you to the work that you've been sent to do, I think before we bind people's consciences or maybe even say no to certain people who would come to serve on our teams internationally, I think we should probably do our due diligence and see what the biblical language of calling really expects or entails. And when we start looking at biblical language of calling, it doesn't function the way that we've come to use it commonly, of saying, I saw this writing in the sky, or I had an unavoidable burning in my bosom that pushed me in this direction. I think more often than not, the language of calling that Scripture uses is just being called to Christ. But then if we're looking for something that would be more akin to a biblical precedent for how do missionaries get identified, the closest precedent that we have is the account of Barnabas and Saul in Acts 13. And they discerned their calling in the communion of the church, that as they're gathered in worship and praise and fasting, the Spirit worked to set them apart for a specific task. The church discerned that, and the language that Acts 13 uses is that it was the church that laid hands on and sent Barnabas and Saul and the Holy Spirit. And so I think we've maybe done a good job of leaning on the Holy Spirit, but we have not done as good of a job historically of expecting that before we use the word calling, we should have some collective, corporate, ecclesial affirmation of the fact that, yes, there's a set apartness, there's a task to which this church is setting you apart, and you're equipped to do that task. And so I think rather than thinking about calling as something that we individually discern, I want to encourage people who are sensing this desire not to squelch it and say it doesn't matter, because of course the Lord has made us as holistic creatures who do have emotions and who do have experiences that he uses to shape us. So I don't want to discount that, but I'd rather, kind of like Bobby Jameson uses this language in his book, The Path to Being a Pastor. And he says, rather than saying I'm called to ministry because I'm in seminary, people should say, I aspire to be an elder someday. That's more biblical language from 1 Timothy 3. And I've come to adopt that as well for missionary candidates, to say, until the church has sent you, let's just call it an aspiration. Say we're seeking that corporate discernment before we use such culturally strong language as being called.
Yeah, very good. Thanks for sharing that.
Kyle, I had a student in my office yesterday, and the student was really thinking through this kind of calling and had a feeling toward a certain part of the world. And now that's been a couple of years down the road, and really trying to discern it, because the feeling for that particular part of the world has changed a little bit, and kind of questioning that. And, once you push in a little bit, one of my encouragements to the student was like, you need to be working this out, not just with parents and not just with you, but like with the local church. And what I consistently find with a whole lot of people is too much of that is done alone. Then we've got the anxiety, we've got the fear, we've got the lack of assurance. So again, to pick up on what Matt's saying, the aspiration is the individuals, the affirmation, and then the actual word that's probably most important is the actual sending. like when the local church both affirms and send, then you can be sure of your call.
And frankly, I think you get the advantage that some of those former generations had of saying, if I could look back at my calling, that would keep me on the field in the hard times. Well, how much stronger is that if you say, hey, I can look back at my sending, that there were a bunch of people wiser than I discerning the fitness of putting me on this track. And it wasn't just a moment in time or a bad taco that I could dismiss and then get back on a plane, but it's actually the body of Christ coming together to affirm giftedness and fit. So I think there's far more grit built into a corporate affirmation than a individually discerned experience.
Yeah, that's good. So if we need to have leading towards Mexico, we have taco night at the church and things like that to help people get
That'll do it.
called.
That'll do it. Just let me know when. I'll be there.
Exactly. No, that's really good. And it's so important for people to get clarity on this because it is going to get pushed up against, and you are going to have doubts that come up. And if you don't have clarity on this, Satan's going to really just push in on it and use it as a wedge to cause doubts. And those doubts, especially if you ascertain this by yourself, we've also seen that people ascertain that it's time to leave without ever talking to you. So that by the time we hear about it, it's like, hey, plane tickets already bought. So there's no opportunity for discussion and
Right.
an opportunity for growth. And so just that need to be learning that pattern of getting input from wise counsel starts from the beginning and it carries out later on to say, hey, I'm facing some struggles here. Can you give some extra input on this? And so it helps to build that pattern there because people make decisions really quick. And so that can help to stop that pattern from developing into a unhealthy pattern in the future.
I think one more implication related to what you just said is that sometimes in the way that we use that calling language, we don't necessarily see it as arrogant, but I think if you put yourself in the shoes of, let's say, a pastor or a missions committee who is hearing you report, I have individually discerned that God has called me to do this. And if the pastor or the missions committee asks for some development or kind of recognizes a something that's not yet ready, well, then they're forced to be, from the perspective of the one who is clear on this calling, standing in the way of God. And it puts the pastor, it puts the church, and it puts those that you are, by virtue of your statement that you are called, in a position of needing to decide whether or not they're going to financially support you. It feels like to withhold support, whether that be affirmation or financial, is to purportedly go against what God has told you. And so there's a weightiness and some very pragmatic implications to using that language as an individual, because it comes with entailments for the others that are going to be involved.
Yeah. Yeah, and that can even apply even to mission boards too. Like if people come to us and say, "Hey, I've prayed about this and I feel led to go." Well, yes, that's good, but is it affirmed by the church, by your church as well, and needing that affirmation there, not just accepting it because they prayed about it. So you also emphasize the importance of character and spiritual preparation over just skills and strategy. What are some key heart attitudes that missionaries need to cultivate before going?
That's really good. I would say the key one would be, or a key one, humility. It's a humility to understand that, like, we're submitting ourselves to God's mission, God's plan, what God's doing among the nations, and we don't get to decide that. Humility and submitting to elders in a local church body who's assessing us to say, hey, you're ready or you're not ready, or you need further equipping in this way. A humility to take the time to learn the language which if you're not humble, it's at least an opportunity for both holiness and humility as you come before that. It's a humility to say that I'm not the Savior. I don't have all the answers. I have been sent, and I've sent here boldly with the gospel and something to proclaim and calling people to repentance and faith, but also understanding that we're weak vessels who are completely dependent upon the Lord, and to learn a language and a people and to stay for a long time and to be willing to make those personal adaptations to how do you make friends? How do you communicate? How do you deal with conflict? And the missionary life is a life of giving up preferences, or maybe what we would call entitlements, what we expect the kind of life. I mean, it's hard in many cases where the church or a mission agency may be making decisions about where you live or where you're going to go for medical care, and you're dependent and humbly asking others to support you financially. And where there's an arrogance, a hardness, a pushing back against any of those, whether it's authorities or the nationals, it doesn't usually go too well. And those, again, are things that like a local church can help cultivate in a person while they're here. You don't get humble because you get on a plane. And part of that humility is like not just thinking less of yourself, but truly being in awe of the Lord and the gospel. And if I could do anything for those who are preparing to go, if I had an awe meter, that's an AWE meter, if I could just crank that up in awe of God and the gospel, like if you have an appropriate understanding that's growing in both who God is and who you are and God's sovereignty and all those good things. So I would say that would be a key one.
And just another expression of that humble posture is a right approach to the scriptures, and realizing before we ever get to any sort of strategy for how are we going to make an impact in the place of the world that we go, we have to realize that there is no impact that we can make that's going to be of value unless it's conditioned by the message that we deeply know and have received and have humbled ourselves before the word of God to say, I don't want my own wisdom. I don't want my own strategy. I don't want my own pragmatic approach to the world. I want to know you, and I want to know you conditioned by the way you've revealed yourself. And the only way I have access to that is my own deep dependence on the word. Knowledge of it is one thing, but even knowledge of it can push us to a self-dependence on our ability to weave together things and do apologetics before actually letting it saturate and bring us, like Josh said, to that place of awe where we're saying, God, you are glorious as you've described yourself. And what I want is to know you as you describe yourself and to make you known as you describe yourself. And that then is going to lead to a posture of humility, but also that willingness to say, I want others who have walked this road farther than me or longer than me or who have been in ministry to be able to assess, is what you have within you in terms of your knowledge of the word and your character sufficient enough for you to be able, like Paul, to say, follow me as I follow Christ, in a place where you are going to be likely a sole example for emerging church of new believers. And the humility to wait where you need to wait, I think, or to go with confidence, not in your own strategy or apologetics, but in confidence that the Spirit will work through you and your knowledge of the word and your application of it in the context. So.
Yeah, I think as you guys are sharing there, one of the key things that we look for in new missionaries is teachability, which is really humility in action. And
Sure.
when we don't see that, it is red flags all over the place, because you have to go as a humble learner, because you don't know the answers before you go. You have to be willing to learn and to grow. And so thank you for sharing this idea of humility there. And I think what's one of the great ways that we can test that is through the teachabilities, setting some opportunities to look and see how someone's going to respond to things. How are they going to respond when they go on a survey trip? Are they going to come in and be like, "Hey, I'm going to do this and this and this," or are they, "Hey, I'm here to learn and understand, so that I can develop and grow a plan through prayer and dependence on God." But then you develop the plan, not just coming in with guns a blazing. So there's a question that God's used in my heart, challenged me, is this on this idea of awe is, are you lost in awe, or have you lost your awe? And that's just such a great reminder to my heart to be like, you know what? The number one thing in importance for me is that I be lost in awe of who God is. And that will have a spillover effect into every single area of life and ministry that we go into. What are some common struggles that missionaries faced in their first year? And are there any things that they could be doing to prepare for those in advance?
Yeah, no, that's really good. One of them, and it relates to the last question a little bit as well, is just personal integrity and holiness. Scott Hildreth, our mutual friend, wrote a great chapter in this, and it's powerful on multiple fronts. One is, I think he puts in there a short letter that a pastor had written, not a real letter, but that if he would have a moral failure or adultery in the future, this is a letter that he would write to his family and church and those things, and just to think through the implications of that. There are mission or agencies that I think rightly would have something like, hey, if you want to move forward in the application process, you need to have been free from looking at porn for a year. I just wonder how many 25 to 35-year-old Christian men, even in the church, like just that one factor, and that alone doesn't get you ready, but that's just kind of a minimum mark that in the last year you haven't looked at pornography. And that's a huge way to get ready. And one of the points in the book is the small cracks and fissures in character, theology, relationships, conflict, whatever it is, when the pressure of a cross-cultural experience, like Satan is a liar, and he will offer you cheap shortcuts to temporary pleasures and sin and offer you those same old things. We know that they're there. And one of the ways that you can prepare is just like a good relationship integrity with others, walking in personal holiness. So this is where I would say, like, the church's role in being the church, even though it's maybe not like directly a pipeline to missions, through moms and dads who are teaching character, through 70, 80-year-old men and women at the church who are pouring into younger couples and preparing them for how to parent. Like if we're doing all of those things, then we have an army of people in local churches that can be called and who can be sent, instead of the oddball one who they seem to be peculiarly interested in discipleship and wanting to teach other people. Like, we should all aspire to walk in integrity in such a way that we can walk. Matt, what would you add on that one?
Yeah, Josh, you alluded to this earlier. But I think that first year, especially when you go from being, eminently capable as somebody who has grown up in a culture, probably, finished your education and may have even worked in the workforce and have been capable of fending for yourself and doing all these things that you maybe don't even realize you've kind of built into your identity, your capability to then translate your whole life into a place where people are going to look at you. And even though you feel successful 6 months in because you just like ordered your dinner, like the people who are looking at you like you're 5 years old. And in the same way as we sometimes, this is wrong, but sometimes when people in our context who are second language English speakers are talking to us, our default assumption is, oh, this is not an intelligent person. Because of the way they're constructing their sentences. Obviously, that's false. But when you realize, oh, that's how I'm perceived in this context, and I am incapable and deeply dependent on people to help me do some of the most basic tasks. And what did I accomplish today? I learned 5 new vocabulary words. Good night. if we've built our identity on what we're capable of doing or how people in our society perceive our contribution to their lives, when you go into a new context, especially in that early season of learning language, all that's going to be ripped away from you. And so that's a major experience for most missionaries in a place, is to be realizing how incapable they are and how limited their bandwidth to make any sort of a dent on what they came to do is, in that first term especially.
Yeah.
Maybe two more quick things. One would be for married men in particular, the need that you will help facilitate your wife in language learning and care of children, and so much generalization, but there's a lot of compartmentalization that we can go to work and do all these things. And now you're on the mission field and you're learning language and you're doing a lot of that study from home. And you can't go to an office or whatever you were as a student and feel like, hey, I got this grade. I've got these things that I've done and I've earned these things. And now, like, okay, you're doing language school and you're not feeling too great at that. And then you're kind of needing to help with the kids so that your wife can learn language as well. So just those kind of family dynamics can be a little bit different. And then I think we're ready for culture shock because a lot of missionaries are trained in that. And then I think you're ready for the culture of the people or whoever you're going to be work with. I think the missionary culture can be a shock to many their first year. People who've been missionaries for 20 years, let's just say they've changed a lot. I changed a lot. And they're there long term for a reason, and they can be a little like sandpaper at times, and they actually do sin, and probably sin a lot. And I think when you don't have much else to cling to, you can look horizontally to team leaders or team members to provide your needs, because parents don't quite understand and you're not quite there with nationals, and you really need these team members to do it all. And that puts those people in an impossible no-win situation. And of course, we know anytime we look horizontally into things of the world, people or circumstances to give us some kind of a joy, acceptance, and like purpose, they're going to fail. Again, that's why we get back to the vertical relationship with the Lord and those things. If you're looking to the wrong place, your team leader and team members cannot bear the weight of those expectations.
Yeah. Those are all excellent suggestions there. Just thinking through when we started off in the field, some practical ways that we're able to tackle some of those things. One was, for me, was just having an accountability partner that was set up before we went. So every month I knew I was going to get a call from Mike, and we'd set it up in advance. And so we were going to talk. And so that was very, very helpful to have that, because when you go to the field, all of your support structure, your accountability, if you don't have it set up, it's just poof, gone. And so you have to have that preloaded, pre-set up, because you're going to hit all kinds of just different situations and stress. And so it's going to be so important for multiple different areas of your life to have that accountability. So that was super helpful. Another one was, Matt, you just mentioned the humility in language learning. We learned, one of the places that our language teacher set us up to learn was we would go to a high school. Now, high school students around the world are notorious for laughing at you when you talk like, a 5-year-old. And so we learned a lot of humility in those classrooms because people would just roar with laughter. And then another one was, someone had mentioned to us in advance the importance of planning ahead for my wife to be able to get the language. And so God really blessed us there. We had a young lady named Lily that came over and lived with us actually for 9 months, and she homeschooled our girls. Heather was able to be just fully immersed in the language learning. And so that was a huge boost for her to be able to get caught up in the language. So there's different creative ways to do that, but it may take some creativity and work to be able to navigate, giving each other time to be able to make that happen. And so I appreciate you guys mentioning that. That is so important to help the wife to be able to get where she needs to be. The husbands will oftentimes go a little bit further, but if there's not that foundation of just some kind of communication, it's really, really hard to be able to last a long haul. So
Can I
you can
do something? This may actually break protocol with a podcast, but can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Okay. So I think as much as Josh and I are describing some of these things as difficult things, there's something important and formative about them that in some ways you can't learn a culture or a language or even to depend on the Lord without walking through the gauntlet of some of these difficult things. And so while it's hard, I'm not necessarily decrying it as something that should be avoided. At the same time, one of the things that we were instructed in our language learning early on was you're not supposed to have a personal car. And that's for the purpose of making you get in taxis and practice language, even in like the daily things of telling somebody where you want to go. And that was really helpful. But I've noticed some of the technological developments today. You can not have a personal car, but you can take an Uber and you don't have to talk to the guy, or a Bolt, depending on where you're at in the world. And you can get to where you want to go by use of this technology without some of the discomfort of forgetting which word is left and right in the context. And while that may alleviate some of the tension or some of the discomfort of learning a new context, it doesn't produce that same level of ability to navigate and learn. So from your perspective at this stage, as you've seen new missionaries coming on the field, what are some of the warnings you would give them to avoid unnecessary avoidance of those uncomfortable things that are going to lead to their best?
Yeah, I think you identified a really key issue there. It's becoming even more easy to circumnavigate that with Google Translate and DeepL and things like that. That, like, we travel around 8 different countries. I don't speak the language in 8 countries, but I can get around and I can use that. I can get by, but I can't have conversations with people in a deep way. And so for people that really want to be able to engage people in gospel conversations, they need to be able to push themselves in that way. One of the most helpful things that we found in both places where we were learning language well, for Zulu in South Africa and Swahili in Tanzania, was just immersion. Like, you've got to be able to get really uncomfortable and just get thrown into it. So I would go live with a Zulu pastor with his family for a few days each month. And I'd come back after that, my brain felt like it was going to explode. And when Tanzania, I went out and stayed out with Tanzanian family and lived there for a while. And that was, in 1 week, I got what I had learned in the books for 3 months. And that's how fast it would help you to grow and to be able to communicate. And so, just like a muscle needs stress to grow, our brain needs the same thing. And it's hard, but without it, you're not gonna get any stronger. You're not gonna get any stronger looking at weights in the gym and not picking them up. It's not going to do anything. You've actually got to work. And so your brain has to do the same thing. Our body and our brain will default to homeostasis. If you don't use it, you'll lose it. If you never use it, you'll never gain it. You have to be able to work at it, and it's just going to take work. One thing that was really helpful, though, that was a very a helpful illustration when we were learning Swahili, the language program we went through talked about the iceberg principle. And I'd never heard this when we were learning Zulu. The iceberg principle was basically that there's different levels to learning. And so 80% of it is below the surface. And some of it, the first level is like, oh, that word is Swahili. That's a first level. You've identified that it's that language. And then the next level up would be, I've heard that word before. And then moving up from there is, okay, so if I heard 5 words, I could maybe pick, or 2 words, I could pick out which one was which. And so little by little, it moves up. Because for me, then the top level would be on command. You could come up with a word, or if you hear the word, you know what it is. Even if it's not in context, you know what it is. That's like the top level of the iceberg. But knowing that there's different levels of learning took a huge amount of pressure off of me, because I felt like before, learning was I could say it on command, and I'd learn it, and then the next day I'm like, oh, I forgot it, and I'd kind of beat myself up. But when I realized, no, there's these different levels of learning, it really helped me to pace myself and just to listen a lot. And just little by little, it moves up the iceberg, and it slowed me down a bit. It de-stressed my brain so that I wasn't as panicky and pushing as hard. And that really did help my brain to learn better. And it's made family relations a lot better too, because I wasn't as stressed. And then you just learn to measure your growth in months, not in days. Like, I've grown this month or this much in the past week. No, once you get past a month, you need to start measuring it in the last 2 months or 3 months. How much have I grown? And that's how you measure that growth then. And that's because, our first language was 3 years. It took me a long time to get it. And so if you're measuring your progress in days or weeks, it can get really discouraging. But if you measure it in months, you're like, you know what? I have grown a lot in the last 3 months. And so that can be really encouraging to help you press on.
Mm.
So yeah, really good point there. It is very different now. Technologies are good, but they can also hinder us. Just like, if we use every appliance possible and we never walk anywhere physically, we're going to get kind of lazy. Same thing mentally. We've got to have things that are going to push us. Good question. Josh, you shared in the book on the topic of serving well as a team. What is the best way someone can prepare to serve on a missionary team?
Yeah, no, that's good. Two things I would think. One, I would think of it in a Philippians 1 kind of a way when Paul talks about in Philippians 1:5 a partnership in the gospel. And then I think it's down in Philippians 1:27. He talks about like striving side by side and this idea of koinonia. So it's more than fellowship. It's a partnership and doing something together. So like what you can be prepared now, the two words would be anchor and then an arrow. So anchor would be like you need to know theology now. If you're going to team up with people, like who you partner with, who you team with, where you're at theologically, I think that's for many who would want to go or before they go. There are definitely some that don't take that seriously enough. Like, you love Jesus, I love Jesus, let's go start a church. Maybe, but actually you're going to find that ecclesiology matters pretty quickly. So you need to be anchored. So what can you do now? You can work on those theological convictions. The other is the arrow that's like going to point us out. So like, what's the target? Where are we going towards? Just getting in conversation around unreached language groups, unreached people groups, people with least access, understanding what's going on, and like understanding what the missionary task is. So that's what you could do now. And then when you think toward like teaming on the field, I think I would think in 3 ways. Primarily, what you can do now is with your local church, because there's a partnership there being sent. They should know what's going on with strategy. They should be speaking into that in the future. You should have relationship with them now. So if one of the teaming is with your church, the other is obviously like your missionary team who's with your organization or whatever. I'm not sure that there's too much that you can do now besides to develop convictions about what type of team would you want to join. Probably the area that I didn't think about too terribly much, though I know it was out there, was teaming with nationals. And how important that is. I think sometimes we think, oh, well, it's our Westerners, it's whoever we're kind of sent with, and it's kind of us against the world. And really, I mean, we know there's conversations around indigenous churches or maybe like the 3 selves. These are common. But really what we want to do is pour our sake out for the sake of the gospel into the lives of men and women who are from that place, and to raise them up in such a way that they can, you could use the word own the work, or see their responsibility in that. And that really our job as an outsider is to partner with them, help equip them so that the church there can continue to do God's mission in that particular place.
Yeah, that's really good. I can't remember where I'd heard it before, but just the idea of a doctrinal umbrella when you're looking at different agencies or teams, even because sometimes even in an organization, different teams are going to be different theologically as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so just to think about organizationally and as a team, what is the doctrinal umbrella that you're going to be coming underneath? Because if it's a big umbrella, yeah, you may fit under it, but you have to consider what else is going to fit under it as well. And is that going to work well for the type of ministry you're going to be able to do? Could you plant a church with someone with with the
Right.
same doctrine that fits under that umbrella. So that was just a helpful illustration for me to think about that context.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
one that we've seen and are trying to help our teams grow on as people come and prepare is just learning how to deal with conflict in a
Yeah.
godly way. And because it's going to happen. And so equipping people to do that and challenging them from right where they're at right now before they come, have the conversation. If there is a conflict, have a conversation. And it's kind of like that muscle that we're talking about with language learning. You have to flex that muscle too of learning to have difficult conversations in a God honoring way and just to work through that process. And so that is such a key one that we see over and over is just that we need to learn how to, in love, have some discussions. A lot of times there are misunderstandings, but if we don't have the discussion, then the angst builds and it blows out of proportion before it comes to light that, oh, it was just a misunderstanding. Well, it's too late then. And so then you have a full blown conflict.
I was just going to say, Kyle, that we get so quickly to canceling people, unfollowing them on social media, avoiding them, and just not dealing with conflict like we're in this cancel culture. And guess what? Like if you're on a team with somebody overseas, you're not going to be able to do that. So if you're someone who's aspiring to be a missionary and you're moving towards that, like if there are people that you have cut off or people that you're avoiding or like there is unresolved conflict, again, flexing those muscles now, doing the hard things. If you're an aspiring missionary and you've not apologized to anyone in the last 3 to 6 months, that's probably an issue. I've probably offended somebody in the last few months, at least in my family for sure, and sinned against them. And like that should just be a regular rhythm. And if it's been like a year, then I'm like, that's a huge deal. Pornography is a big deal. And never apologizing or working through relational conflict is a different kind of a big deal, but it is.
That's really good.
You can add that one to the list there of have you apologized to someone in the last 3 months?
That's really good.
It's good. A lot of missionaries are going to face suffering, culture shock, burnout. What are some of the best ways to build that resilience and longevity in ministry?
I mean, in some ways, this goes back to a prolonged season of the church observing somebody in ministry, observing their character, observing their skills, and I mean, in some ways, the longevity of the process. Are you willing to walk through a prolonged process of being assessed by the church and evaluated before being sent is going to be one of the indicators of, are you somebody who is quick to get worked up at an idea and then can lose interest quickly? Or is this something of a sustained long endeavor that's willing to kind of like what you said that suggestion was, are you willing to do what it takes to get to do what you want to do? That's going to be an indicator of whether that character quality of grit is something that's going to manifest itself on the field. I think the maybe Sunday school answer, but profoundly important answer is, are you walking with the Lord who is leading you to the work? I mean, the one who's walking with you is going to be your sustaining grace in whether it's frustration or boredom or insecurity or more direct things like acute persecution or the things that you're going to have to be risking or the preferences that you're going to have to give up in order to be faithful to that task. The Lord's going to be the one to sustain you. And so are you giving evidence of being somebody like that? I think this may be a bad example, but there is this TV show I've heard about some people who work in an office. And there's this episode where this guy comes in, the boss of the office, and he's really excited because he watched a TV show that talked about the needs for adoption. And he's telling the secretary, "Hey, could you like sign me up to adopt somebody? I saw this really cute kid, and I want one for myself. So as quick as we can get him here, like let's make that happen." And the secretary pushes back and is like, okay, I mean, if you're serious about this, we can do this, but it's probably going to take like several months for any paperwork to get going. And his response is, several months? I mean, I might not even want the kid at that point. I think sometimes we get real excited having watched a TV show or gone to a missions conference about the cool factor of missions. And if we get to the field on riding the wave of that enthusiasm quickly, we don't necessarily know whether or not when that wave of emotion is gone, will we stick it out? So
Just a couple of practical things on the culture shock one. There's not one particular chapter on abiding in the book, but in these 10 chapters, like I think every author just about hits abiding, whether it's suffering or singleness or prayer or serving or identity or leaving what you love. Like everybody's pointing back to that, of course, because that's the center of it. So if I'm saying, okay, how do you get over some culture shock and stress? So abiding is number one. Maybe my second one would be to laugh. Man, we're in the midst of doing some of the hardest and most sobering things, and we are a people who are grieved over sin and lostness, and people who are giving their worship to somebody else. And we can be really joyful and have a lot of fun and not take ourselves quite as seriously. And it's either laughing or crying. And probably on a good day for a healthy missionary, there's a healthy dose of both. And do that as a team as well. So abide, laugh. Two more would be learn the language and get in a national's home. When you're isolated and you can't speak and you're using a Google Translate or whatever else, like you're just feeling like an outsider. I mean, the more you can learn a language, get in someone's home, get to know them and love them, having both the relationship and the ability to communicate, like God made us for that. And that's why you're there. So like do those things, I think would be really, really important. So again, that was abide, laugh, learn the language, and get in somebody's home.
Yeah, that's really good. There was that quote of along the lines of what Matt, what you were saying, just the idea of a long obedience in the same direction. That's really what it takes, is just that pressing through. And Josh, all those things are so important, especially the abiding. That connects with so many of those other parts that spills over into that. If we're not abiding, then we have nothing. Apart from me, you can do nothing. We have to be abiding, and so important to have fruit if we're going to have to stay connected to the vine. One of the things that you guys touch on in the book is the role of the sending church and supporters. And you touched a little bit on this in the discussion, but how can churches better prepare and care for their missionaries before and during their time on the field?
I think the first thing is just awareness of that being the church's responsibility. I think missionary agencies are wonderful partners in ministry and bring a lot to the table for a church as a church seeks to deploy its members to the needs around the world in missions. But I think at times the expertise that an agency has allows either the agency to presume or the church to abdicate a responsibility to do that hard work of assessment, evaluation, training, shaping, and deploying. And so sometimes you get the people who approach the leadership of the church saying, I think I'm called to missions. And they're like, great, I know a guy or I know an agency that can take it from here. And I think the first step in preparing well alongside of a church is for the church to say, if we're going to do the weighty task of laying hands on somebody, to send them to the ends of the earth, to do work to bring the gospel and its implications to people who don't have access to it currently or have limited access to it currently, we want to make sure we've done our due diligence to say, this is somebody who is qualified. This is somebody who is capable, competent, has the character qualifications of somebody we'd want to send. And just that recognition that that is a church's responsibility, I think, is a starting place to saying, okay, if this is a responsibility, how do we build it out?
Mm.
Yeah. A couple maybe keywords for churches. One is expect the missionaries to be sent, whether you're 40 or 5,000. Expect the Lord, like that's a normal part of a church. Then the other one is like assess them, like be looking. Don't merely wait for the random individual to come to you and say, I think I'd like to go. I'm kind of interested in traveling. Instead, like, hey, identify in the power of the Holy Spirit. It almost seems like Acts 13, right? And like call people out
Almost.
to, hey, would you consider doing this? So there's expect, there's assess, and then there's equip. Um, the church is the primary agent of God's mission, and they have the resources with elders and disciples and the word and the spirit to equip people for this task. They can partner with others in education, certainly. So equip them. Another word would be send them well, and then like actually partner with them when they're there. So like strategically knowing what they're doing and keeping up with their spiritual health and visiting them on the field. And then probably another one be like would receive them back, whether that's short term for a couple months or receiving them as they might return to the United States or wherever it is long term. But we're often pushing on young people, like go to your local church. If they're in Matt and I's office or others, we're like, talk to your elders, talk to your elders. And praise be to God, there's some wonderful churches who are doing some great things. It's so encouraging. And there's others, it just doesn't seem, and maybe they caught a guy off at a bad moment, but it just doesn't seem there's a, call it a pipeline, a process, or carefully thought out, like, here's how we can help you get to there. It's like, okay, you want to go? That's great. Let's go find the agency. We'll match you guys up. And that's not nearly enough.
And
Yeah.
just to lest a church or a pastor listening to this kind of feel like we are dumping more on their already overloaded plate, to kind of tether back to even our opening question about like what's a misconception. I think the fact that what you are sending somebody to do at a core task level is the same thing that hopefully your church is already equipping people to do here at home should give a little bit of a pressure release of that. And I try to tell pastors, look, if you are regularly assessing elders and deacons in your context, you have some sort of a process for doing that, what's to preclude you from using a very similar process to assess the competencies of those who are going to go out and do some of those same functions just on a mission field? So let somebody who's aspiring to missions sit in on elders meetings, or let them work through the doctrinal statement of the church and see where they need to bone up to be able to explain how the Bible leads to some of the convictions of the church that's going to send them out. And don't feel like you have to reinvent the wheel in order to now develop a whole missionary training process, but figure out how can you do that level of assessment of character, competencies, and convictions in-house in ways you're already doing it.
Yeah. And that was when we were getting ready to go. That was two of the things you mentioned. There was things that were required for me to do. I did some more theological training, which I did with a retired pastor. So it wasn't taking anything from the church there. Found someone that was able to walk through that with me. Spent time in the elders meetings, just being there. You learn so much from just being in those meetings, and it also took time for ordination. One material, a resource that someone has shared with us recently is called Practically Trained Pastors, 52-week field guide for ministry in the trenches. And I'll put a link for it in there. But if churches are like, I don't even know how to train someone up to do this, this gives you all the extra books to go through. And so the pastor could just take it and just have a weekly conversation, but they're not having to create the material from scratch. And so things like that are so important. Something else that kind of came to mind as you guys were talking is just that don't send someone to do something that you wouldn't hire them to do. If you're not able to, as a church, be like, hey, yeah, we're affirming them as a pastor, don't send them as a pastor. You need to be able to affirm them as that, if that's the role you're sending them to do. And I think that's so important that we need to be able to equip people to do the role that going to be sent to do. And and this is not to look down on that. It's just to say for them to be effective for the long haul, that's what we need to do. And take the time, like you mentioned there, take the time to get ready to be able to do that so that they can be effective in that role long term. And God can bless that through the preparation and the work that they do. So important. You guys have both served overseas yourselves. Was there a particular lesson or insight in the book that was just, man, I wish I would have known this before I went, that really stood out to you guys?
We've talked a lot about it, but the whole calling thing is very individualistic for me. I think that would have been great. I think the one on suffering, I can remember in our training, I looked over at my wife, Amy, and heard a lot of these missionary stories, and life had been pretty clean and smooth to that point. And I looked over and I wonder what our first year would be like. And there were lots of hard things. And some of that, again, like you can know it, but you have to kind of live it out. I think the lessons about singles on the mission field, I went married, and I think we learned a lot, some the hard way. And I think our last team in particular, we had a good number of singles, and it was a blessing to have them, and like how to serve them well as a family would be a couple that I would think of.
I'll just note, as somebody who knows some of those singles who were on Josh's team, there may be things that he's saying he wished he knew ahead of time, but I have heard direct report that he and Amy gave incredible supervision and integrated these single ladies into the family and into the team dynamic in really profound ways that leveraged their gifts for mission. And so maybe there's some things you wish you knew cognitively, but I think instinctively.
You met everybody from our second team, though. We were in two different countries. The first team you probably haven't met. So thank you for the kind words.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think the family one was something that I was in the process of learning very distinctly on the field of. My wife and I went married, but without kids. And I think the addition of children during our time added new nuances to what it means to free my wife up to do the ministry that she has to do in ways that required some intentionality, even intentionality just of calendaring together to say, when am I going to be taking my turn to be with the kids and to not babysit the kids. I hate that when dads say they're babysitting the kids. You're not babysitting, you're fathering. So that's different. But the intentionality that it takes when you are both responsible for ministry and both responsible for parenting, and the privilege of having a schedule that you do get to be flexible with in most contexts requires thoughtful intentionality and new ways of serving your wife and allowing her to do the ministry that's hers. So I would have benefited from some further reflection ahead of the Lord providing children.
Yeah, that's a good reminder of just that intentionality. It's going to take that intentionality, sitting down with the calendar. So that's a great point that you made there, to have a habit to get into for husbands and wives in ministry, whatever phase they're in, to do that. So there's clarity there. Something that really stood out to me as I looked back on our time overseas, two of them. One was memorizing scripture. And not just reading it, but memorizing it. And at the time, it felt like really, really boring jobs. Like I was a janitor at Cedarville for a year at the graveyard shift. I memorized a ton of verses during that time because there was no one there. And then the next job I had was I worked a lot by myself, digging trenches for a propane company. I memorized a ton of scripture there. And as I look back on it now, I'm so thankful for that because God brings those things to mind over and over again. And so just to encourage people to kind of like the whole Google Translate thing, you've got to do the work. You've got to put it in. And when you hit the ground with trying to learn language, not the best time to try to beef up on your scripture memory because your brain is cooked. And so taking that time in advance to learn a lot of scripture. And then the second one was really growing in your understanding of the sovereignty of God. And that is so foundational to how you are going to interpret all of the junk that happens to you. And if you don't have a solid foundation on the sovereignty of God, you are going to get shook up really, really bad. And because there's going to be a lot of stuff that are going to be difficult. And so those two things I look back were so foundational, in addition to the other things we talked about, but was thinking about as just in evaluating what were really key for me that God has used in my life.
That sovereignty of God piece is not only helpful for what you're saying there in terms of shaping your response to the crud of life, but also even your formation of strategy, and whether or not you can go to bed at night and rest. Or if you don't have a high view of the sovereignty of God, man, there's so much pressure of saying, how dare you put your head on the pillow when there's people you haven't saved yet?
Absolutely.
So,
yeah. There was an elder in our church. He's passed away now years ago, but he used to say the sovereignty of God is kind of like the watershed issue, and it will determine your behaviors and your theologies all the way down the mountain, whichever side of the mountain you land on the sovereignty of God, it's going to determine a lot of things about your life. And so that one is such a pivotal doctrine to really, really go deep, deep, deep on and understand as much as we possibly can. We're not going to fully grasp it, but the more we can, it really does change us and inform us. So, well, Josh and Matt, thank you guys so much for taking the time to share, taking the time to compile this book. Just kind of as a last thing, how do you envision this being used by churches, by new missionaries? How would you hope it be used?
Yeah, so a couple of ways. I mean, one, maybe there's a missionary who's finishing seminary. They've got a lot of theological education, or maybe they're near the end and they pick this up and they're reminded of some of the expectations. That would be great. I'd love it to be a high school or a young college student or somebody else who's working and they're just kind of aspiring to this and they're thinking through what would it actually look like? Like, I'm excited. I love God. I'm studying maybe about his sovereignty. I'm seeing lots of maps of the world or things that are telling me about lost people. Like, what would it actually look like? That would be great. Maybe one of the best ways we'd like it to be used is by local church, by faithful members, maybe by a pastor who doesn't have missions experience, to walk through it with, for the ladies' version, a young lady, a men's version, the men's version, to say, hey, I don't have the experience, but let's learn together. Let's read these chapters. Let's talk about the questions and let's talk about like what are the implications right now for you as we as a church assess and equip and look forward to sending you. So I hope it's not merely a book that people would read alone, but maybe in small cohorts or groups of guys or girls with somebody in their church. And again, I want to encourage, even if you don't have the missions experience, this book is going to give you a resource in your hand to use people who are on the field now or who've done the job well, to kind of walk alongside others with. So I hope it would be a blessing to individuals and to churches.
Yeah, none of the authors would claim that they put the final word in their chapters. But if each chapter could be a springboard to substantive conversation with somebody who's walking alongside of you, that would really be our view for how it could best be used to maximal effect.
Very good. And as I was going through, I noticed each chapter has a few different questions at the end for some time of reflection, and those could be, again, springboards into conversations with each other, if with a pastor and an aspiring missionary, to be able to talk through those. Could have some really important conversations and thinking through things in a really formative way before you get there, and so that you're prepared. It's kind of like you don't. Good soldiers go through boot camp first. You don't just send them out. You just don't send them out because they're ready to go, or think they're ready to go. They need preparation. And that mental and spiritual preparation is so important for missionaries before they go. So thank you guys for your time today. And this has been a real blessing. And I pray that this will be an encouragement and an equipping tool for many new missionaries in the future.
Thank you. It was our pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle.
Well, that's all for this show, and we want to thank you again for spending your valuable time with us today.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider taking just a moment and giving us a great review. Your review will help people find the podcast and allow these resources to encourage more people. If you took something valuable away from this episode, please share it with someone who would enjoy it.
If you'd like to find the show notes, blog posts, and free resources for ministry and leadership, as well as some information on my book, Overflowing, visit kylefarran.com. That's KYLEFARRAN.com. Hope to see you soon on a future podcast.